Hi everyone. The next few sessions that you're going to take part in for media will have a video that I'm going to, or your teacher is going to upload at the start of each session. But for the next 3 sessions at least, they're going to be on the same theme. And this is the first one today. So I've put this as the first slide to remind you that there are 2 parts, 2 halves of the course. Half of the course is what we call analysis, where you watch films and discuss the techniques being used, and the other half of the course is production. And I always like to remind my pupils what the relevance is of every single task. So today and the next few sessions are going to be tasks based around that fit into the analysis side of the course. Okay. So this is just an introduction, and then session 1 will be based on this video, and hopefully that will be enough for you to do in one session. But if you need to come back to it in between time, then please do. At the start of the next session that you're meant to be at media, there'll be another video and another task to do, and then the same again for the next one after that. So this is the analysis side of the course, and you might also remember from my introductory video that there are 7 key aspects of media that we basically pin everything that we learn into at least one of these key aspects, right? So you might notice there on the right hand side the word representation, which is quite a lot of the work you've already been doing on action stereotypes and things like that, sits under that heading of representation, things like stereotyping and whatnot. And so again, just to remind you where everything sits, the reason why we're doing everything is always going to come back to these key aspects, and today's and the next few sessions are going to be based on language. So that's why I made that one go bigger. So language in media doesn't refer to spoken word like dialogue, which you might think because of the word language. What it actually refers to is all the different ways that media makers create meaning. So all the different techniques that they can use. So like a writer has at their disposal words and imagery and sentence structure, and they use all of those tools to create meaning. Well, in media, they have to use different tools to create meaning, and language is the study of those tools. And we break language down into technical codes and cultural codes. Now, a code is just, if you like, a tool to create meaning, and a technical code is one that requires like technical equipment to create meaning. So if I just give you some examples, it should be a bit clearer. Technical codes can be broken down into camera work, lighting, editing, and sound. So basically any technical decision that a filmmaker makes based on, like what camera shot to use, or what type of lighting setup to use, or what musical score to use, or even things like how quickly to edit a scene together, things like that. All of those technical decisions are what we call technical codes. And cultural codes has fewer subsections. It just has one, which is the French word, the French term mise en scène. If you haven't heard of that before, please don't worry, because that's a big one that we'll keep coming back to. But mise en scène is French for put in the frame. So if technical codes are about the setup of the shot and the setup of the scene that you're watching, cultural codes and mise en scène are just what you see in the frame. So that's why it means put in the frame. So for example, a character's costume or their facial expression or their body language in relation to another character, props and settings and things like that. Basically everything you see in front of you in the frame is something that you can analyze as a cultural code, and anything that has been technically decided by the director to set up the shot can be analyzed as a technical code. That might seem like a whole bunch of new information all at once, and I don't like to bombard with new information. I just like to I just always like to sort of show you where everything is meant to go and give you a wee bit of context. So please don't worry, we will come back to all of these throughout the course. In fact, we'll study these pretty much throughout the entire course, because when you're either analyzing or creating your own films, you need to know about these codes. So this is just a real quick introduction to them, and we'll refer back to them throughout the year. So please, again, don't worry. The next few videos and this session are all just going to be based on one of these, which is camera work. So this probably 3, maybe even 4 sessions are all going to be based on camera work. So you can forget about lighting, editing, sound, and mise en scène for now, but it's just to remind you where they all are. And actually, before we move on, you probably have been doing quite a lot of studying of mise-en-scène already, because when you've been analysing your stereotypes in action films, you've probably looked at things like their costume or their stance or like their props that they're holding or things like that. And all of that's actually you analysing cultural codes without even knowing it. So this is session one or section one of the study into language and camera work that we're going to do. At the end of this video, there'll be a link to a Microsoft Forms quiz, and that will require you to fill out the quiz and show that you've taken in like the information that I've tried to give you. And also I'd like you to fill out the engagement log or the learning log or whatever it's called on the Teams channel that you're in. Because remember, that's dead important for us to see who's doing the work and who's engaging with the stuff that we're putting up. So before you get started on this next section of the video, you probably want to be getting like some lined paper or a Word document or even just the notes section of your phone, like whatever you've been using to write down things during your lockdown learning, because like I said, there's a quiz at the end. But more importantly than just this final quiz at the end of this video, the notes that you're going to take today on camera work are going to be really, really important for you to refer back to throughout the year. So this isn't like, you know, the only time I'm ever going to teach you about camera shots. But if you concentrate now on this video and take your notes nice and neatly and sort of keep them in an organized way, then you're actually starting to make some decent like notes that you can refer back to throughout your study of media. So these could be your headings: language, and then the subheading technical code, and the subheading camera work. And that's all we're going to be studying, like I said, for the next few weeks. But camera work itself can be broken down further into three components. So there's distance, so how far away the camera is from its like what's being filmed. Angle, how high or low or straight on the camera is in comparison to what's being filmed. And then movement. So remember, we're not just studying print text or film stills, we're studying film. So we need to be able to study how the camera moves and what that might mean as well. Today's video is just about distance and angle. We're going to come back to movement as a separate video. That'll be next session. So we're just going to look at distance and angle today. Okay, so the first camera shot I'm going to show you and talk to you about is the closest a camera can get to the subject, and that is what we call an extreme close-up. So I would write that down. I'm not going to tell you when to write everything, but this is like your first distance. So extreme close-up. Now, we always, when we're talking about distance, we always talk about it in relation to a person. So I'll start with that. When it's a person, the extreme close-up will show like part of the face, not even the whole face. So for example, this one from Kill Bill. And you can see that it takes up the whole screen. So the closer a camera is to the subject that's being filmed, the more that thing takes up the screen. If you imagine if this was from further away, we would see her whole face, and her face would then be smaller in the frame. So directors use extreme close-ups to really draw our attention to something. Imagine this was on the cinema screen, right? That's huge. So this would be like a really huge picture of just someone's eyes. And that's important, obviously. They want us to notice this. So they do it to draw attention to things, and they also do it to create what we call a claustrophobic effect. And what I mean by that is that you feel like you don't really know what's going on. You feel kind of like too focused in on her eyes, and you can't figure out like where she is or what's going on. You've only got this sort of tense look in her eyes and this blood on her face to get any clue about what's going on. And that can be quite disorientating for the viewer and make us like really need to see the next few shots to find out what's going on. And it can create this claustrophobic effect, like we're too close into them and we need to like get a bit further away so we can get a bit of context. You know, like you wouldn't stand that close to someone's face most of the time. So like you need a bit of distance to be able to feel like you know what's going on more. So another example, remember, extreme close-ups only show part of the face, very, very close. This is the lady screaming in Psycho, so to draw attention to her shock and fear. And although we use people's faces as our examples, remember you can shoot anything. It doesn't always have to be people that you're filming. So this is an example of an extreme close-up of an object, a tiny, tiny object taking up the whole screen. So it's had to be very, very close to the object to draw attention to that elf language on that ring in Lord of the Rings. So your kind of headline notes for extreme close-ups is they're very, very close. They can be disorientating because they're so close, and they can have a claustrophobic effect. And if it's a person's face, then it will just show part of the face, like the mouth or the eyes. So as the camera gets further away, we come to our second shot, which is a close-up. And if it's a person's face, this time it will be their whole face, right? So here's a scary looking dude from The Shining, and we can see his whole face in the shot. So that's still pretty close. Like, you wouldn't stand that close to someone, would you? Probably not. So it's still pretty close. Their whole face takes up the whole screen. So we're not talking like, their waist up or anything like that. That's the next one. Close up is the face. And directors use that to draw attention to people's emotions or to draw attention to people's reactions to things. So this one is obviously a close up to show how scary he looks, his big snarling mouth and his crazy eyes. And he is on a rampage. If you've not seen The Shining, he's a scary guy. So this close up is a famous one, and it's used to show that he has properly lost the plot and he's on a rampage. Another close up here, you can see his face takes up pretty much the whole screen. It's a wider angle lens, so you've seen a bit more either side of him, but certainly his face is the focus. There's the Joker. So again, we're being drawn attention to, actually that's two kind of crazy guys I've put as my examples, but drawn attention to his messy makeup and his scars and his bedraggled hair and things like that, and you're just a bit disconcerted by how kind of funny looking he is. And remember, it doesn't always have to be people. So a close-up of a phone lighting up with a text and someone grabbing it makes that seem like an important action. So if I'm going to do a close-up, right, I want my audience to know that whatever I'm shooting in that close-up is important. So if it's a person's face, it's either their emotions or their appearance that I want to draw attention to, or maybe their reaction to something. And if it's an object, that's probably going to be an important part of my plot. So this phone going off in this movie is likely to be important. Going further back from a close-up is what we call a medium shot or a mid shot. And on a person, that's where we film them from the waist up or the torso up, like this here. Now, you're losing the sort of closeness that you will have seen in the close-up shot where the face takes up the whole screen, or even the extreme close-up where part of the face takes up the whole screen. But what you're gaining is a bit of context, so you get to see the setting around the character, and you get to see much more of the character themselves, their costume, their body language, and their stance and things like that. So you're learning by getting that bit further back, you're learning quite a lot more about the character and where they are and what's going on. So you get a bit more context with a mid shot. Here's another example. So mid shots then are waist up or torso up, and they give us a bit more information about the characters, setting, their costume, and their body language, and therefore we get a bit more understanding of the action. So if you imagine this one was shot in a close-up, you would just see her face looking off to the right. But given that it's a mid shot, we get to see that she is standing, ready to fire her arrow, and that she's in the woods. So we get a lot more context and we get a lot more understanding of what's going on as we're this little bit further away. And it's also good because you can still see their facial expression. So it's not like so far away that you couldn't make it out. It's a decent distance. You can see their face and you can see where they are and what's going on. As the camera gets further away, then we've got a long shot, and if mid shots were waist up on a person, long shots are the full body. Look how much smaller he is on the frame there, right? Comparing that to a close-up even where the guy's face took up the whole screen. This is a long shot, so his body takes up the whole screen, so naturally he's smaller in the frame, and we see much, much more of the mise-en-scène. So we're seeing all these other characters, and we're seeing where he is. We're seeing a bit more about his body language. So again, you lose the focus on the emotions, but you gain with a long shot much more setting and context, which is important often. So this is why filmmakers juggle between the shots a lot. If I wanted to go from this to a close-up, it would be to draw attention to his emotions. Maybe he's sees something bad happen on the street, and then we cut to a close-up of his face looking shocked. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. So you use a combination of the shots to create meaning the way that you want. Again, if this was a close-up, you would just see his scared face, and you wouldn't know why he was scared. Whereas because it's a long shot, we're seeing that all these tribesmen are chasing him, and that helps us understand that he's scared because he's fleeing for his life. So long shots give you context. And they don't always need to be people walking or running. Long shots can just be there to show like setting and mise-en-scène, like I said. So this one is a long shot because there's a man standing almost in the whole frame. These two on the left are a bit closer, so they're not quite shot in a long shot, but this is still what we call a long shot because there's a guy standing in the frame. You can see almost his whole body, but you can also see quite widely around the room, and it's there just to show us like this is a standard house in like the 80s and things like that. All right, and so that's long shots, and then establishing shots is the last one that we're going to look at for distance, and these are the furthest away or the sort of the longest shot that we talk about, which is there just to tell us where the action's about to take place. So a film might start with a shot like this one, and that tells us that the action we're about to see takes place in this city, which is New York. Or it might start with a smaller establishing shot like this one, which is just outside a restaurant, and it tells the viewer that the next shot you're going to see and the next scene that you're going to see take place is going to happen inside this restaurant. So establishing shots are there to set the scene and to show us where the action's taking place. Okay? And I should have one that moves here. So you can see they're just using a shot that shows the outside of the apartment, and then they cut to this inside the apartment, and we can just assume that that's inside that apartment building that we've just seen. So they're just basically a shorthand for viewers to be able to figure out where the action's taking place. And they often don't include people in them at all, and if they do, they're just people that are cutting about doing their own thing. So establishing shots, your main note for that is that they're very far away, then they just show a location, so they tell the viewer where the scene's going to take place. So that's the end of the shots that we're talking about in terms of distance. If you want to take a break, you can. We've had extreme close-ups all the way down to establishing shots. And next we're going to look at angles. So you can see from the little icon up here in the top right that now we're talking about angle. But anyway, eye level is the first angle. There's not much to say about eye level. It does exactly what it says on the tin. It is just shot from the level of the character's eyes. So it's like we're just looking straight at them. And they're used very, very frequently. They're the most normal kind of shot to use, if I can use that phrase. They're the most kind of unobtrusive and like, yeah, the ones that create normality the most, these kind of shots. It's only when you want to play about with normality or create impressions that are different from that that you would play about with angles. So eye level is just there for normality. And like I said, you might, I don't think I did already say this, but you probably shoot a lot of your films in eye level, and most of the films you watch will be mostly shot at eye level. And yeah, so we'll talk about how you can mess about with normality using angles in a minute, but eye level is just the first one to talk about because it's like bog standard. So it just creates, like I said, the biggest sense of normality and is very unobtrusive, doesn't have much of an effect. Then we come into angles, right? So playing about with the angles, we've had eye level, and then low angle is where you move the camera lower down than the subject and look up at the subject with the camera. So this one, for example, from The Dark Knight, is the camera's down low, looking up at the Joker, and it's there to create the sense of his power and his dominance, right? Making him seem quite scary, or just that he's kind of in control, right? This one again, a low angle of the characters looking up at them and making them seem like they're in control of the situation. And you can play about with meaning with your angles. You know, like this one is from a film called Seven. I don't know if you've seen it. It's an 18, so you better not have actually. But these two are detectives, right? And they're shot from this low angle, and they feel like they're in control of the case, like they understand what's going on. But actually, guys, they've got no idea what's going on because there's a big twist at the end of the film, and it shows you that these guys were miles off. But anyway, the low angle there to create the sense of power or control or dominance. And low angles, like everything else, don't always have to be of people. This one is a terrible grainy image. I'm sorry, it's not better quality, but this is a low angle shot of a house that's meant to seem quite scary and imposing. And it is Norman Bates' house in Psycho. So it is quite a scary and imposing setting, actually. And so low angles are used to make something seem powerful, scary, bigger than normal, or in control if it's a person. So that's number two. And then obviously, if we've had low angle, the next subsequent one would be high angle. So this time we're moving the camera up high and looking down on a subject. And if a low angle shot is there to create a sense of power or importance, a high angle shot does the opposite. It makes something seem smaller or more vulnerable. So here's little girl Matilda from Matilda. And she's being shot from a high angle to make her seem tiny and small and out of place in the library. You know, if you've not seen the film, she's a little girl that can read like really difficult books and she's only wee. And so it's filming her from this high angle, looking down at her to make her seem like she kind of doesn't fit in this big, scary library. And she's out of place kind of because she's so small and cute and vulnerable, and her wee costume and her wee bow make her seem like too young to be there. And so the high angle shot kind of adds to that meaning. Another one from Psycho, poor Detective Arbogast going up the stairs, and he's being shot from a high angle shot because he is actually in quite a lot of danger going up the stairs in Norman Bates' house. And another example from Slumdog Millionaire, she's vulnerable too. So these high angles make the character seem smaller or vulnerable. And there's a nice little drawing. Eye level, straight on, high angle, camera's up high, looking down, low angle, camera's down low, looking up. Right, moving on from the sort of high and low angles, aerial shots are very similar to a high angle, but they're from right above, and they're sometimes called a bird's eye view or a God's eye view shot. You can call them either. I call them aerial shots, like the camera is right above the subject. And this is actually just from soon after that high angle I just showed you of the detective walking up the stairs. This is when he gets to the top of the stairs, the camera comes right above them and looks down with this bird's eye view or aerial shot of this person coming out of the bedroom with a knife attacking him. And it makes us, the audience, feel like we can see it all. And it makes us feel like all seeing, like almost that's why people call it a God's eye view, because you can see it all. But it also does create the sense of the people below us, like kind of being like ants or, you know, things that you're studying, you're looking down upon them. So it can create this sense of vulnerability sometimes, or it can create the sense that we as the audience are like more powerful than the subjects. So we can understand more about what's going on than anyone else in it because we are like God's eye view looking down. And there's one from the Shawshank Redemption. He's just escaped from prison. That's a spoiler. But this is a famous shot looking down on him, and we as the audience are placed in this sort of more powerful position looking down upon him. The next angle is the canted angle shot or the Dutch tilt, and this one is a really interesting shot. It's one of my favorites. Please use them in your own films. It's where you basically put the camera sort of on a tilt or on its side a wee bit, and therefore like the horizon isn't straight anymore. So if you think about most times you're filming, it's like straight on. It might even be on a tripod, so it's properly straight on. And if you just tilted the camera to the left or right, that creates what we call a Dutch tilt or a canted angle. So here's one. And like I said, the horizon isn't straight anymore. So behind Ron there is some steps, and they should obviously be straight going up. But because the camera's tilted, you can see they're going up at the sort of angle, and the door that Harry's leaning against is not going straight up. So you can tell that it's because of this tilted camera. And what's interesting about that then is that these kind of shots suggest to us that everything isn't normal, everything isn't okay. So it creates this disruption or a sense of unease or uncertainty or disorder, right? Or chaos even. So this is obviously during a bit in Harry Potter where everything's not great, you know, it's not all happy eating Mrs. Weasley's pancakes or whatever you do. This is like a scary bit in Harry Potter because you can tell by their facial expressions and like they're in the middle of doing something serious. But also because of the canted angle, it creates a sense that something bad's happening or something out of the normal is happening. And this one from The Dark Knight. And this one's important because if you've seen The Dark Knight, you know that Batman rarely gets rattled and rarely gets stressed out. He's very calm as he's dealing with baddies. But the Joker gets right under his skin and Batman lashes out like he doesn't normally, and he grabs the Joker off the chair and he goes to be violent with him. And the director cleverly uses this canted angle shot. You can see, look, the floor is slanted up. Everything's on a bit of a tilt to suggest chaos or disorder or that, you know, a break in normality. So Batman's like acting out of character here. And canted angles, like extreme close-ups, aren't used really, really frequently in films. They're used sparingly to create this effect when you need it. Right, there's only 2 more shots to do. These aren't so much angles as just like different kinds of shot that I wanted to talk to you about. So the over the shoulder shot, you can abbreviate that to OTS if you needed to, because that's a long phrase. Is just what it says on the tin again. It's filmed over the character's shoulder looking at someone else, and it's there to draw connections between characters, right? So it's often used for conversations, because if you imagine a conversation just filming it with just mid shots or just close-ups, it would actually seem a wee bit less like a conversation and more like loads of people doing speeches just at each other. Whereas, as you know, conversations involve a bit of back and forth, a bit of reaction. Body language is important in conversations. So over the shoulder shots draw you into the connection between the 2 characters. But there we are, a conversation between Regina George and Lindsay Lohan's character, and a conversation between Jack and Rose in Titanic, and drawing you into the relationship between them. Look how close they're standing, look at the connection, like he's staring really earnestly at her. So over the shoulder shots are there to, like I said, used for conversation or to draw us into a connection between characters. The last shot, you might be glad to know, is a point of view shot, POV. And this is where the camera just becomes the eyes of the character. So everything's filmed from their point of view, their perspective. So this person's obviously just said something a bit outrageous at this dinner party and everyone's looking shocked at him. Or this person's obviously either got a bleeding nose or has done something terrible, maybe something violent, and the point of view shot looking at their hands. So it puts the audience in as the eyes of that character, putting you in their shoes to watch things from their perspective. And that can be really useful if you want us to, if as a film director they want the audience to sympathize with the character or experience things from their point of view. Or it can also be quite useful if you want to obscure things for the audience, and like you quite often see it at the start of like CSI or like, I don't know, in like cop dramas or horror films, you might just see a camera like moving through the woods and hear breathing, right? And you get from that this is a point of view shot and this is someone running through the woods, and you're trying to figure out, is it the victim, is it the murderer, and things like that. So it can be quite disorientating for the viewer as well. It can make us question whose eyes are we seeing things from, or if it's obvious whose eyes we're seeing things from, then it's there to let us experience things alongside that character. All right, so that was quite a lot of information. Now, hopefully you paused that video plenty and you can rewind it. That's the good thing about these videos, right? You can pause things and rewind it if the teacher goes too fast, and you can like mute me if you're sick of hearing my voice and stuff like that, which you can't do in class. So that's one good thing about these videos, eh? Right, so camera work that we've looked at so far is distance, so the distance between the camera and the subject, and the angle is what we've looked at so far. All right, and we're going to come to look at movement later. But you should now hopefully have notes on 5 different distance shots that we talked about, from extreme close-up to establishing shot, and 7 different other kind of shots that refer to angle, high, low, point of view, things like that. So you'll need those notes going forward for the next task and for subsequent tasks. So if you haven't taken notes, it might be a good idea to go back and do so at your own pace. You know, like take your time if you want to just do distance first and then, you know, go and get a cup of tea and come back and do angle, whatever. But once you've taken your notes on distance and angle, I'd like you to stop the video and visit this link, or you can scan this QR code to go to that link. I'm going to post it as a separate post in our Teams chat as well. I'm going to do all the things that I can to make it easily accessible for you. And that's just a short quiz on today's notes and on today's like information that I've taught you. So take the notes, go do the quiz, and fill in the engagement log. And that's you done plenty of work for media for this session. And once you've done that, you can be proud of yourselves. All right, you'll get another video from me on whenever your next session is. So I'll see you then.